This is the Soul to Earth podcast. I'm your host, Carrie Koss, psychic, evidential medium, mentor, and witch, here to help you explore your connection with the spirit world and discover your own grounded spiritual practice. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited you're here joining me. Today, I am excited to bring this topic to you. In the beginning of my relaunch of the Soul to Earth podcast, I mentioned to all of you that I am on a journey taking me back to my roots as a pagan, but also as a witch. In the interests of wanting to share these practices with you, to be able to find these things within yourself, to see if it resonates, if it aligns, if it strikes a chord within you. I'm going to share my experiences when it comes to witchcraft and pagan practices, the beauty of it, the nature of it, different elements, and some beginner-friendly resources that might get you started on this incredible journey. Today, we're going to be talking about what is a spell and spellcrafting. So let's get into the episode. I'm going to take you back a few years to when I really started getting reawakened to my path, both as a priestess, but also as a witch. And so one of the things that I love so much about being a pagan witch is that everything in nature, just as everything within our makeup, is animated. It has a consciousness. It has meaning. It has purpose. It has significance. But also we, as spiritual beings living in this three-dimensional world, we have power. We have creativity. And so different from when you go from a position of having a monotheistic God, where there's one God outside of you, if that's your relation. For me, part of being a pagan and a witch has to do with realizing that everything has a bit of the divine within it. Everything has correspondences, connections, energy, consciousness. And just as I have loved understanding myself as a pagan and witch, I've also enjoyed learning how to work my own manifestation and magic in my life. I've always been very creative and spontaneous. I love ritual. I love doing things that I find to be ceremonial, purposeful, and meaningful because I feel like it's enriched my life. It's created meaning and connection. When I began to visit this idea of doing spell work and understanding it, the correspondences involved with it, the education, but also the hands-on approach, I knew it was for me. So I'm going to read you something from an incredible book, which is a really good introductory book to witchcraft and spellcrafting. It is by Pamela Ball, and it's called The Book of Practical Witchcraft, a compendium of spells, rituals, and occult knowledge, if you're interested in learning more about witchcraft and also spell work. One of the things that's mentioned here, and I'm quoting, it says, there are three important aspects when reciting a spell. The first is that words spoken with intensity and passion do have a power all of their own. The speaker has a power and energy, which with practice, they may learn to use effectively. The third component, the forces and powers belonging to that which is beyond the human being, have a tremendous power and are called upon, used, or directed for a specific purpose. The use of all three aspects gives a very powerful spell. I'm going to give you an example of my own life and practice and a spell that I have done, or a very similar spell, because sometimes witches don't reveal all the points of a spell. I wanted to share this with you to see if this gets you interested, excited, wanting to research more and educate yourself on this. So for me, this goes back to our podcast from last week where we talked about manifestation and the law of attraction. My orientation as an adult has always been to be able to manifest and align myself of what I want to experience or have happen within my life. Spellcrafting is a part of that. I understand myself to be a person who has fears or blocks when it comes to self-confidence in a certain area. I'm going to craft a spell to help me release that fear, step into my confidence, and align with energies for my highest good to manifest my intention. So what happens, the crafting of a spell? The first thing I like to tell people is that you want to start with what you want to experience or manifest. Let's say, for example, I want to have success in a class that I'm going to be teaching locally. For me, I'm looking at different components of that experience. The first thing is I want to create a small spell, also known as a road opener. I want to do something that's going to open up the roads and the energy so that experience can come into my life. So I remove any blockages. Blockages are ones that I don't even know about. They might be something within me. They might have to do with blocks connected to people that want to come to the class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at correspondences and spells that are going to help me open up the road. When it comes to spell work, everything that is in nature and everything that we find that is a part of a spell is working with different elements. The primary ones being air, earth, water, fire, and then also spirit. When you're doing a spell, you want to look at what it's going to take to open that up. Just like in tarot, everything has a correspondence and an element to it. We'll talk about the 5 elements. And the first one we're going to start with is earth. Okay, now earth, obviously, you can find that in a lot of different things, and this is something you'd bring into the spell. You can find things that are related to earth, of course, when it comes to dirt. It can be a physical object. It can be something connected to nature, leaves, herbs, flowers, rocks. So that is an element you want to bring into the spell. Typically, if you can have every element represented when you're crafting your spell, just like when you're baking a cake, it is going to create a stronger foundation for that spell. Let's say, for example, that I'm wanting to have this road opener. What I'm going to bring is some dirt. Dirt that's maybe connected to the place I want to do the class, or maybe connected to soil of a place I'm really connected to near my house. You can also use crystals. Next, we have the element of air. Earth has a color correspondence, and the color is green. Air has to do with breaking free from a situation. Just like earth helps ground something, air represents things moving, right? So things that you can use when it comes to the element of air, that's smoke, that could be feathers, that could be you blowing air and doing an invocation around the spell. The color corresponding with air is yellow. Next, we have fire, one of my favorites. I do a lot of candle magic. Fire is transmutation. It makes things happen quickly. It has a lot of power, and it's also very much a masculine energy. Now, going back a bit, each of the elements also is corresponding to either the masculine or the feminine. Now, this has nothing to do with gender. It has more to do with qualities. When we're talking about feminine energy, such as what we find both in earth and water, we're talking about something that's receptive, that holds structure, that receives, that nurtures, that grows. When we come back to fire, again, it is definitely something that's more catalytic. It makes things happen. It also, especially when it comes to road openers, it opens up energy. The color connected with this is red. I like to do a lot of candle magic, so I'm always using the element of fire within that. There's the wax, so that could be considered connected to earth because of the soil involved, possibly, right? Also the air that comes in, that's with the air that's created from the candle. That's another aspect of it. Next, we're going to move into the element of water. Now, of course, water is very much connected to emotions, right? And also, I would also say relationships. When you do any working and you have water there, often people will have an offering for the spirits they're working with. It could be a glass of wine, a cup of water, some tea, some coffee, things of that nature, fruit. The color associated with that is blue. It's also the giver of life, and it's definitely a feminine energy. Now, the last element we're talking about today is the element of spirit. Spirit doesn't really have a specific color. It's the fifth element. You could really choose the color you're wanting, because when you're bringing in spirit, spirit is everywhere. You could have it be purple, it could be orange, whatever color you're feeling. When you see the pentacle or the pentagram, which is often found in witchcraft, that's representing all the elements. When you're representing all the elements and then you say and you create this beautiful spell, you are invoking and you're creating an intention. So as part of your spell work, when you're getting very clear on what you're wanting to manifest, you want to put your attention and intention clearly out to spirit. In this case, I would say you're putting it out to either your spirit guides or maybe the elemental spirits, things like that. This is all part of the education. So this is just a simplistic version of beginning spell work. The other thing I like to do when I'm doing spell work, I like to have corresponding herbs. I'm educating myself constantly, and I have now an apothecary of herbs and also flowers and things of that nature, crystals that I use in my spell work, because every single herb and every single flower on this planet has a correspondence. There are wonderful dictionaries dedicated to understanding the correspondences of each flower and herb, so you can do corresponding things with your spells. For example, you've heard cinnamon, right? Cinnamon is known to be good luck. It's also good for prosperity. You can use things like rosemary for protection. When I'm doing a spell that's for nurturing and healing, things of that nature, I'll use lavender. I also use rosebuds when I'm doing something much more connected to my divine feminine work. It's such a beautiful art form. You get to express yourself in many ways, and it's an endless education. I also will mention that there's an amazing correspondence book created by Llewellyn, the publisher, that does a lot of spiritual and metaphysical and occult books. And theirs is one of my favorite ones because they really have so many correspondences. Everything from the gods, you might be working with seasons, what are those connected to, herbs, and it goes on. It's very comprehensive. So different types of spells for different types of things. And when it comes to educating yourself, really it is my advice to keep it simple. When you're learning about spell work and witchcraft in general, my suggestion is don't bombard yourself with too many books at once. Pick a few that you've heard good things about and you resonate with the people who suggested them, and see what you think. There's a lot of correspondences when it comes to planetary cycles, the moon, and zodiacal cycles, which a lot of people like to do at certain times. There's an endless amount of learning and exploration. The main thing is just have fun and enjoy it. I do recommend starting your own spell book and grimoire. So a grimoire for me is really like a recipe book. It is a recipe book of the spells that I'm doing and the intentions that I have set forth. And it's also a way for me to measure and keep track dates when I did a spell, the results, things like that. An actual spell book goes a little bit more into what the results were, what your reflections were, would you change anything? So they go hand in hand together. Doing spells has enriched my life tremendously. I feel so much more in touch with the rhythms of nature and the cycles of the moon. I also feel empowered in my own creations and manifestations. It has taken that experience for me and made it tenfold. I also love working with the spirit guides, deities, and ancestors that I do spell work with as a medium. The deities I work with often give me ingredients and ideas for spells, as do my ancestors. So there is an incredible, rich experience ahead of you should you decide to explore this. I would say keep things simple for yourself and do what feels right for you. This is not religion. This is your spiritual practice. Some people that do spell work also don't necessarily work with gods or goddesses or ancestors or spirit guides at all. And there's many different opinions on that. There are people that do much more common, simplistic spell work that's very much connected to the kitchen and their hearth, and they just put things together and do it spontaneously. There are much more structured practitioners who go through elaborate steps to do their spell work. And then there's people in between, which I'd say I'm somewhere in between. I like having structure. I like being thoughtful and planning my spells in advance, although I do use creativity and spontaneity as well. Sometimes I spend a lot of time going back and forth about an ingredient I use and saying, is that something I resonate with right now? Does that feel like the right correspondence of what I want to create? And that's just an example of how specific you can get and how creative you can get. And then sometimes, like the other night, I became very aware of a candle that I wanted to do to honor one of the spirits I work with. We have an agreement together that we are working together to have a co-creative relationship for me to do the work I'm doing. And so I hadn't given them a candle in a while. And that's one of the agreements I have, is that I will offer a candle as a gratitude and a thank you, just like you would for a friend. And so with that, I became aware of, wow, I'm just pulling together all the correspondences of these flowers that I'm putting into this candle. I was so delighted that I could call forth that energy and that the essence of what I was intending for that spirit as a means of love and gratitude. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast today. This episode has been really fun for me to do. There'll be more about this. And if you found this interesting, please be sure to make a comment and make sure you are liking and also sharing with friends. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode. You've been listening to the Soul to Earth podcast. Follow me on social media and watch the full episodes on YouTube.